40 feet down. That is how far I fell when my husband threw me into that well. 40 feet of darkness rushing past me before I hit the water. Cold water. So cold it felt like 1,000 needles piercing my skin all at once. Water that came up to my chest and tried to pull me under. Stone walls so narrow I could barely move my arms. Complete and total darkness. And above me, growing smaller and smaller, that tiny circle of grey sky. The last glimpse of the world I thought I would ever see. The man who threw me down there was my husband, the man who had promised before God and our families to protect me, to provide for me, to honor me. He looked down at me for one long moment, his face just a dark shadow against the fading light. And then he walked away. I heard his footsteps on the gravel. I heard the car door open and close. I heard the engine start. And then I heard nothing but silence and the sound of water dripping off the ancient stones. What you are about to hear is not a story I made up. It is not a nightmare I had. It is not something I saw in a movie and decided to pretend happened to me. This is my life. This is what happened to me on September 3rd, when I was 24 years old. My name is Layla. And this is the story of how I was thrown into an abandoned well to die and what I found waiting for me at the bottom. But before I tell you about that well, I need to tell you about the life that led me there. Because you cannot understand what happened in the darkness until you understand the darkness I was already living in. I grew up in a small village in the mountains of northwestern Iran, near the border with Azerbaijan. Our village had maybe 300 people. Stone houses built into the hillside. Narrow streets where you could hear your neighbors through the walls. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone watched everyone. And everyone knew their place. My father was a farmer. He grew wheat and barley on a small plot of land that his father had farmed, and his father before him. My mother raised 6 children. I was the 4th. 3 brothers before me, 2 sisters after. In a house like ours, a girl in the middle learned quickly to be invisible, to help with the cooking and the cleaning and the caring for the younger ones without being noticed, without causing trouble, without asking questions. We were not poor by village standards, but we were not wealthy either. We had enough to eat most days, a roof that did not leak too badly, clothes that were worn but clean. That was enough. That was supposed to be enough. I was married at 16 years old. Not by choice. I do not think anyone asked me what I wanted. I do not think it occurred to anyone that I might have an opinion worth hearing. His name was Davoud. He was 28 years old, a distant cousin of my mother's family from another village. He worked in construction in Tabriz, the big city, and he came to our village that summer looking for a wife. He wanted someone young. Someone who had not been ruined by modern ideas, someone who would know her place. My father saw an opportunity. Here was a man with a city job, money coming in every month, one less daughter to feed and worry about, one less dowry to save for. The negotiations happened fast, 2 weeks from the first meeting to the wedding day. I remember sitting in the corner while the men talked about money and arrangements. I remember thinking that they were discussing me the same way they might discuss a goat or a piece of furniture. The night before my wedding, my mother sat with me in our small kitchen. The fire was dying down and the house was quiet. She held my hands in hers and looked at me with eyes that held something I did not recognize then. I think now it might have been grief, or maybe resignation. Or maybe she was just remembering her own wedding night so many years before. She told me that my job now was to make my husband happy, to never argue with him, to never question him, to give him sons, She said that if I did these things, if I was a good and obedient wife, I would have a good life. She said that a woman's happiness comes from her husband's satisfaction. She said that I should always remember that he was the head and I was the body, and the body does not tell the head what to do. I believed her. I had no reason not to believe her. This was the only world I knew. This was how things had always been. I thought that if I just followed the rules, if I just did everything right, everything would be fine. I was wrong. Davud brought me to Tabriz after the wedding. It was the first time I had ever been to a real city. The noise, the traffic, the buildings taller than anything I had ever seen. I remember pressing my face against the car window like a child, trying to take it all in. Davud laughed at me. Not a kind laugh, the kind of laugh that says you are foolish and he is not. Our apartment was on the 4th floor of an old building on the outskirts of the city. 2 rooms, grey walls, small windows that looked out onto other grey buildings, a kitchen the size of a closet. A bathroom I had to share with the family next door. This was my new home. This was where I would spend the next 8 years of my life. The first few months, I tried so hard to be what Davud wanted. I woke before him every morning to prepare his breakfast. I cleaned the apartment until there was not a speck of dust anywhere. I learned to cook the foods he liked exactly the way he liked them. I spoke only when spoken to. I never complained. I never asked for anything. But it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough for Davud. I learned very quickly that the man I had married was not the man my father had met during those 2 weeks of negotiation. Davud had shown my family a mask, polite, respectful, generous. But behind closed doors in that small grey apartment, the mask came off. Davud had a temper that ignited without warning, like a match struck in a dark room. One moment, everything would be quiet, normal. The next moment, he would be screaming at me, his face red, his hands shaking. The food was too cold. The apartment was too messy. I had looked at another man on the street. I had not looked at him with enough respect. I had breathed too loudly while he was trying to think. Everything was a reason. Anything could set him off. The first time he hit me, I was 17 years old. We had been married for 7 months. I had burned the rice. Just a little bit. Just a thin layer stuck to the bottom of the pot. But to Davud it was a personal insult, a deliberate act of disrespect. Evidence that I did not care about him, did not appreciate him, did not deserve to be his wife. His hand came so fast I did not even see it. One moment I was standing at the stove, apologizing, promising to be more careful. The next moment I was on the floor, my ear ringing, the taste of blood in my mouth, stars exploding behind my eyes. He stood over me, breathing hard, and told me to clean myself up before I got blood on the floor. I did not burn the rice again. I learned to stand at that stove and watch every single grain. I learned to do many things to avoid making him angry, but the truth is, it did not matter what I did. Davud was going to hit me whether I burned the rice or not. The rice was just an excuse. The anger was always there, simmering just below the surface, waiting for any reason to boil over. Over the years, I learned to read his moods like weather patterns. I learned to recognize the signs that a storm was coming, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went flat and cold, the way he would go quiet, too quiet before the explosion. I learned to make myself small in those moments, to disappear into the walls, to become invisible the way I had learned as a child in my father's house, but I could not always disappear fast enough. And the bruises accumulated on my arms, my ribs, my face. I became an expert at explaining them away. I fell down the stairs. I walked into a door. I am so clumsy, you know how it is. The neighbors pretended to believe me. Maybe they really did believe me. Or maybe they just did not want to get involved. That was how things were. A man's business with his wife was his own business. We had no children. Year after year, my belly remained flat. Davud blamed me for this. Of course he did. Everything was my fault. The doctors said there was nothing wrong with either of us. Sometimes these things just take time, they said. But Davud did not want to hear about time. He wanted sons. He wanted proof of his manhood. And I was failing to provide it. The beatings got worse after the 3rd year, when it became clear that I might never give him children. He told me I was useless, worthless, that he should have married someone else, that I was lucky he kept me at all, that any other man would have divorced me and sent me back to my village in shame. I believed him. I had no reason not to believe him. This was the only world I knew. For 8 years, this was my life. Wake up, cook, clean, try not to make him angry, fail, get hit, apologize, sleep, repeat. I stopped hoping for anything better. I stopped believing that anything better was possible. I just existed, day after day, waiting for nothing. Everything changed in the summer of my 24th year. It was a Thursday. I remember because Davud always worked late on Thursdays, which meant I had a few hours of freedom, a few hours where I could walk through the city without looking over my shoulder, a few hours where I could breathe. I was at the bazaar buying vegetables for dinner, moving through the crowded stalls, trying to find the best prices, trying to make the small amount of money Davud gave me stretch as far as possible. I was examining tomatoes at one of the stalls, checking for soft spots, when I heard a woman's voice beside me. She said those are overpriced. She said the stall at the corner has better ones for half the cost. I turned to look at her. She was about my age, maybe a few years older. She wore a simple navy headscarf and had a kind face. But that was not what struck me. What struck me was her eyes. There was something in them I had never seen before. Not in my mother's eyes, not in any woman I knew. It took me a long time to find the word for it. Peace. She looked peaceful, in a way that seemed impossible. In a world where women like us were supposed to be afraid, supposed to be anxious, supposed to be constantly watching and waiting and worrying, this woman looked like she had found rest. Her name was Nasreen. She offered to show me the better stall, and I found myself walking with her through the crowded market. We talked about nothing important at first. The heat, the rising prices, the traffic that got worse every year. But I could not stop looking at her, could not stop trying to understand what made her different. We exchanged numbers. In Iran, this is not unusual for women. We help each other. We shared tips about sales and doctors and where to find things. Davud would not have thought twice about it. Nasrin and I began meeting at the bazaar every Thursday, always at the same time while Davud was at work. We would walk through the stalls together, sometimes buying things, sometimes just talking. She became my first real friend since I had left my village. The first person I had really talked to in 8 years. After 2 months of these meetings, I finally asked her the question that had been burning in my mind since the first day I met her. I asked her why she was different. What was her secret? How could she have such peace when the world was so hard? She looked at me for a long moment. I could see her deciding whether to trust me, whether to take the risk. Then she leaned close and whispered 4 words that would change my life forever. She said I followed Jesus. I did not understand at first. Jesus was a prophet in Islam. We respected him. What did following him have to do with anything? But Nasrin explained that she did not follow Jesus the way Muslims follow a prophet. She followed him as the Son of God, as her savior. She had converted from Islam to Christianity 3 years before. She was what they call in Iran a kafir, an apostate, a traitor to the faith. I should have walked away. I knew the danger. Converting from Islam in Iran is a crime. The punishments range from imprisonment to execution. People disappear. People are found dead in their homes with no explanation. This was not something to play with. But I could not walk away. Because looking at Nasrin, seeing that peace in her eyes, I realized I wanted what she had. I wanted it more than I had ever wanted anything in my life. More than I wanted food or safety or freedom. I wanted that peace. So I asked her to tell me more. Over the next several weeks, Nasrin told me about Jesus. Not the prophet I had learned about in Quran school, a different Jesus. A Jesus who healed the sick and welcomed the outcast and loved the unloved. A Jesus who treated women with dignity and respect. A Jesus who died on a cross, not because he was defeated, but because he chose to sacrifice himself for humanity's sins. A Jesus who rose from the dead 3 days later, defeating death itself. She told me about God, not the distant, demanding Allah I had grown up fearing. A different God, a God who called himself Father, who wanted relationship, not just obedience, who loved me not because of what I could do for him, but simply because I was his child. Everything she said contradicted everything I had been taught my whole life, and yet somehow it felt true, truer than anything I had ever heard. After 3 months, Nasrin gave me a gift, a small book with a plain cover that looked like poetry. Inside was a New Testament, translated into Farsi. She pressed it into my hands and told me to hide it carefully. She said reading this book could change my life, or it could end it. She was right about both. I hid the New Testament inside an old pillowcase at the bottom of my closet, beneath winter blankets that Davoud never touched. Every day while he was at work, I would retrieve it and read. I read with the door locked and one ear always listening for footsteps on the stairs. The words I found in those pages were unlike anything I had expected. I had been taught that the Christian scriptures were corrupted, changed, unreliable. But what I read did not feel corrupted. It felt alive, like the words were speaking directly to me, directly to the deepest wounds in my heart. I read about a man who healed the sick without asking for payment, who touched lepers when everyone else ran away in fear, who fed thousands with almost nothing, who walked on water and calmed storms with a word. These miracles amazed me, but they were not what captured my heart. What captured my heart was how Jesus treated women. I read about the woman caught in adultery. The religious leaders wanted to stone her as the law demanded. They brought her to Jesus, probably hoping he would condemn her. But Jesus knelt down and wrote in the dirt. And when they kept demanding an answer, he stood up and said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." One by one, the accusers walked away. And Jesus looked at the woman and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." I wept when I read that story. I wept because I knew what it felt like to be that woman, to be dragged before judgment, to be condemned by men who thought themselves righteous, to expect nothing but punishment. And here was someone offering forgiveness instead. I read about the woman at the well, a Samaritan woman, looked down upon by the Jews. a woman who had been married 5 times and was now living with a man who was not her husband. By every measure of that society, she was worthless, shameful, untouchable. But Jesus sought her out, spoke to her with respect, offered her living water that would never run dry. He saw her not as a failure, but as a person worth saving. I read about Mary Magdalene, about Martha and Mary, about the women who followed Jesus and supported his ministry, about the women who stayed at the cross when the male disciples fled, about the women who were the first witnesses to the resurrection. In a world that dismissed women as unreliable, Jesus trusted women with the most important news in history. These stories broke something open inside me. For 8 years, I had been told I was worthless, useless, a failure as a woman and a wife. Dawood's words had seeped into my soul like poison. I had believed him. I had believed that God himself saw me as less than, that I existed only to serve and suffer. But Jesus saw women differently. Jesus valued women. Jesus loved women. And if Jesus was who the Bible said he was, then maybe Dawood was wrong about me. Maybe I was worth something after all. The Gospel of John became my refuge. I must have read it 20 times that first year. One verse in particular became my lifeline. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Light. That was what I needed. My whole existence had been darkness. The darkness of fear, the darkness of abuse, the darkness of hopelessness, and here was someone promising light, promising that I would never have to walk in darkness again. Slowly, carefully, secretly, I began to believe. I started praying to Jesus. At first, it felt strange and frightening, like I was betraying everything I had been raised to believe. But the more I prayed, the more I felt something I had never experienced before. Someone was listening. Someone cared. Someone loved me. Not because I was a good wife or a good Muslim or a good anything, just because I was me. The change happened slowly. So slowly that I did not notice it at first. But Nasrin noticed. She said my eyes looked different. Less afraid. She said I carried myself differently, like someone who had found solid ground to stand on. She was right. For the first time in my life, I had hope. Real hope. Not hope that Dawood would change, not hope that my circumstances would improve, but hope in something beyond my circumstances. Hope in a God who saw me and loved me and promised to never leave me. The danger grew with each passing week. I became careless. I read for longer and longer stretches. I forgot to put the book back in its hiding place once and found it on the bed just 5 minutes before Dawood came home. My heart nearly stopped. If he had come home early that day, if he had found that book, I do not know what would have happened. Actually, I do know. I just did not want to admit it. But I could not stop reading. The truth had taken root in my heart, and roots, once established, are almost impossible to tear out. September 3rd, I will remember that date for the rest of my life. The day my old life ended. The day I died. The day I was born again. Dawood came home early from work. There had been a problem at the construction site. Some equipment broke down. The foreman sent everyone home. I did not hear him come up the stairs. I did not hear him open the door. I was sitting on the bedroom floor, the New Testament open in my lap, tears streaming down my face as I read about the crucifixion of Jesus. His shadow fell across the page before I knew he was there. I looked up. Dawood stood in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us moved. I watched his face cycle through emotions. Confusion as he saw me sitting on the floor. Recognition as his eyes fell on the book in my lap. disbelief as he realized what it was, and then rage, pure, white, hot rage. He crossed the room in 3 steps and ripped the book from my hands. Pages tore, the spine cracked, loose pages scattered across the floor, words I had memorized, promises I had clung to, lying in pieces at my feet. The first blow came before I could stand. His fist connected with the side of my head. The world went white, then red, then black around the edges. I fell sideways, hit the wall, slid down to the floor. He stood over me, breathing hard, and I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before. Not just anger, fear. This was different from all the times he had hit me for burning rice or looking at him wrong. This was about something much bigger. This was about honor, about religion, about shame that could never be erased. He demanded to know where I had gotten the book, who had given it to me, how long I had been reading it, whether I had told anyone, whether I had converted. Each question was punctuated by another blow. I tasted blood. I felt something crack in my chest, but I did not give him Nazrin's name. Whatever happened to me, I would not bring her into it. I lied at first. I said I had found the book somewhere, that I was just curious, that I did not really believe any of it. But Davoud saw through me. He always could see through me. And finally, he grabbed my face and forced me to look at him and demanded the truth. "Have you become a kafir?" he asked. "Have you left Islam for this Jesus?" I could have kept lying. I probably should have kept lying. But in that moment, something rose up inside me. All those verses about truth, about not denying Christ before men, about standing firm even in the face of persecution. I thought about Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times and wept bitterly. I did not want to be Peter. I wanted to be brave. So I looked at my husband, this man who had beaten me and degraded me and made my life a prison for 8 years. And I said, yes, I believe in Jesus, and I will not deny him. Something changed in Davoud's eyes. The rage was still there. But underneath it, I saw calculation. Decision. He let go of my face and stood up slowly. "Then you have killed yourself," he said, "and I must protect this family from the shame you have brought upon us." He left the room. I heard him in the kitchen, opening drawers, gathering things. When he came back, he had electrical cord in his hands. He bound my wrists behind my back, put a cloth in my mouth, wrapped his jacket around my shoulders to hide the bindings. Then he walked me down to his car like a husband helping his wife. If anyone saw us, they would think nothing was wrong. We drove north, away from the city, into the mountains. I recognized the road at first. We were heading toward Davoud's family village, but then we passed the turnoff, kept driving higher into the mountains, further from any town or village or sign of human life. The sun began to set. Orange and pink light spilled across the mountain peaks. Under different circumstances, it would have been the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Davoud did not speak for the entire drive. 2 hours of silence, just the sound of the engine and the wind and my own terrified breathing. I knew I was going to die. I just did not know how. Would he strangle me, stab me, throw me off a cliff? My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. We turned onto a dirt road I had never seen before, bumped along for another 20 minutes, until we reached what looked like an abandoned farm. Stone walls crumbling, no roof, a rusted tractor that had not moved in decades, wild grass growing up through cracks in the foundations. This place had not seen human activity in years, maybe decades. And in the center of the property, surrounded by dead grass and broken stones, There was an old well. The circular stone wall rose about 3 feet above the ground. The wooden cover had rotted away long ago. Looking into it, you could see nothing but blackness, a hole in the earth that went down and down and down into nothing. I understood then what Davud intended to do. He pulled me from the car and dragged me across the rocky ground toward the well. I tried to struggle, but my hands were bound and my legs were weak. He was stronger than me. He had always been stronger than me. At the edge of the well, he stopped. He removed the cloth from my mouth. He wanted to hear me beg, I think. He wanted to see me break. He asked if I had any last words for my Jesus. There was mockery in his voice. I looked at him. This man I had lived with for 8 years, who had hurt me in ways I could never fully explain. And I said the only thing I could think to say, the only thing that felt true in that moment. I said, I forgive you. His face twisted. I do not know if it was anger or confusion or something else. And then he put his hands on my chest and pushed me backward over the edge of the well. The fall lasted forever. I remember the rush of air, the stone walls flashing past in the darkness, my own scream echoing off the narrow shaft, and then the water. Cold, so cold it stole my breath. I plunged beneath the surface, my feet hit the bottom, soft mud that tried to hold me down. I fought my way up, broke through, gasped for air. The water came to my chest. My arms were still bound behind my back. I pressed my shoulders against the stone walls to keep from slipping under again. Above me, that circle of grey sky. So far away, it looked like a coin. Davud's face appeared at the opening, a dark silhouette against the fading light. He looked down at me for a long moment, said nothing, then disappeared. I heard his footsteps on the gravel. The car door opening, the engine starting, growing quieter, gone. I was alone, 40 feet underground in freezing water, with my hands tied behind my back, and no one in the world who knew where I was. The walls of the well were smooth, worn by centuries of water and time. No handholds, no cracks to grip, nothing to climb. Even if my hands had been free, I could never have climbed out. The opening was too far above me. The cold seeped into my bones. My teeth chattered so violently I bit my tongue. Tasted blood. My muscles started to cramp. Staying upright required constant effort. Every few minutes I would slip under and have to fight my way back to the surface. Each time it was harder. The sky above me faded from grey to dark blue to black. Stars appeared in that small circle, so beautiful, so impossibly far away. I watched them appear one by one, wondering if they would be the last thing I ever saw. Hours passed. I do not know how many. 3, 4, maybe more. Time lost all meaning in that darkness. There was only the cold, the water, the struggle to keep breathing, and the growing certainty that I was going to die in this well. I thought about my life, about the village where I grew up, about my mother's hands and my father's silence, about the wedding day when I wore a dress I did not choose and married a man I did not know, about 8 years of fear and pain and loneliness, about Nasrin and her kind eyes, about the words I had read in that New Testament, about Jesus. And I thought about how strange it was that I was not more afraid. I was dying. I knew I was dying. My body was shutting down. The hypothermia was taking hold. My thoughts were getting fuzzy around the edges. But underneath the physical terror, there was something else, something steady, something calm. It was the peace that Nasrin had talked about, the peace I had read about in the Gospels, the peace that passes understanding. Even here, even now, even at the end, it was real. In those final hours, as the cold claimed more and more of my body, I prayed. Not with fancy words, not with proper form, just raw, desperate cries from the deepest part of my soul. Jesus, if you are real, if everything I read is true, please do not let me die here alone. I am not asking you to save my life. I know that might not be your plan, but please, please do not let me die alone in this darkness. Be with me. That is all I ask. Just be with me. I remember the exact moment everything changed. My body had gone numb. I could barely feel anything. I was slipping into unconsciousness. My grip on the stone walls was failing. I knew I had only minutes left before I slipped under the water for the final time. And then I felt warmth. It started in my chest, spread outward to my arms and legs. This was not the false warmth that comes before you freeze to death. I know about that. This was different. This was real, tangible, external, as if someone had wrapped a heated blanket around me, as if someone was holding me. My mind cleared. The fog lifted. And then I saw it. Light, not from above. The stars were still there, distant and cold. This light came from beside me, filling the narrow well with a golden glow that had no source I could identify. It was gentle, soft, but it illuminated everything. The stone walls, the dark water, my own body. Everything was bathed in this impossible light, and standing in the light, somehow standing on the water itself, there was a man. I could not see his face clearly at first. The light seemed to come from within him, making it hard to look directly at his features. But I knew who this was. The same way you know your mother's voice in a crowd, the same way you recognize home. He reached toward me. His hands touched my face, gentle, so gentle. And when he spoke, his voice echoed off the stone walls, but also somehow resonated inside my very soul, like he was speaking to me and through me and within me all at once. Layla, he said, I am with you. I have always been with you. Tears poured down my face, not from sadness, not from fear, from being found, from being seen, from being loved in the darkest moment of my existence. I had asked him not to let me die alone, and he had come. The one who threw you here meant it for evil, he said, but I am turning it for good. You called for me in the darkness, and I am the light that darkness cannot overcome. I remembered the verse I had read so many times. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. Here I was, in the deepest darkness I had ever known, and the light had found me. He reached down and touched the cords binding my wrists. They fell away, just fell away as if they had never been tied. I brought my arms forward, expecting pain, expecting the raw skin and cramped muscles from hours of bondage. But there was nothing. No pain, no damage. My wrists were whole. I am going to bring you out of here, he said. But first you need to understand something. You were thrown into this well because you chose to follow me. And there will be more trials ahead. The path I am calling you to walk is not easy. There will be more suffering, more persecution, more moments when you will wonder if I have forgotten you. But I will be with you through all of them. I will never leave you in the darkness. What happened next, I still cannot fully explain. He took my hand and we rose, straight up through the shaft of the well, the stone walls passing by on either side, not climbing, not flying, just ascending, as if gravity had simply agreed to let us pass. We emerged into the night air. The stars blazed overhead, more brilliant than I had ever seen them. The mountains stood as silent witnesses. I stood on solid ground, my clothes dripping, my body whole. I should have been dead from hypothermia. I should have drowned. I should have been a corpse at the bottom of an abandoned well. Instead, I was standing in the presence of the living God. We stood together in the ruined farmyard. The light that surrounded him was fading now, but I could see his face clearly for the first time. I do not have words to describe what I saw there. Kindness, strength, sorrow, joy, all of it at once. Eyes that had seen everything and still chose to love. He told me I had a choice to make. I could walk away from this place and hide, change my name, start a new life, never speak of him again. No one would blame me. After what I had suffered, no one would expect anything else. Or I could tell the world what he had done for me. Not everyone would believe. Many would mock. Some would try to silence me. But some would hear my story and find hope. Some would call upon his name because I was brave enough to speak. And those souls were worth any price. I thought about what he was asking. To live openly as a Christian in that part of the world was to invite persecution. To speak publicly about my experience was to make myself a target. There would be danger, suffering, perhaps even death. But I had already died. At the bottom of that well, I had accepted death. And he had given me back my life. How could I refuse to use it for him? I told him I would tell everyone. I would tell them what he did for me. I would tell them that the light shines in the darkness, and that the darkness has not overcome it. He smiled. And in that smile was everything I needed. Approval, love, pride in a child who had chosen well. He pointed toward the east, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. He told me there was a village 3 hours from here. I would find help there. And he told me to remember that he would be with me always, even to the end of the age. Then he was gone. No dramatic exit, no flash of light, just gone. And I was standing alone in the first light of morning, alive, free, transformed. I walked through the mountains as the sun rose. My clothes dried in the morning heat. My body felt stronger with every step. 3 hours later, exactly as he said, I found a small village. The people there were surprised to see a woman walking alone out of the wilderness. Even more surprised when I told them what had happened. Most did not believe me, but one old woman did. She was a secret believer, part of an underground church. She had heard of miracles like this. She hid me in her home and contacted people who could help. Within a week, I was on my way out of the country. The underground network of Christians in Iran is more extensive than most people know. Brave men and women who risk everything to help persecuted believers escape. They smuggled me across the border into Turkey, hidden in the back of a delivery truck. From there, I applied for asylum. The process took 18 months. 18 months of interviews and documentation and waiting, living in a refugee camp, not knowing what would happen, but never once doubting that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I learned later what happened to Davoud. He returned home that night and told everyone I had run away, abandoned him, brought shame on the family. He played the victim. No one looked for me. No one asked questions. A missing woman in that part of the world is rarely investigated. When news eventually reached him that I was alive and had surfaced in Turkey, he fled. I do not know where he is now. Part of me hopes he is haunted by what he did. Part of me hopes he finds the same grace that found me. Both things can be true. Forgiveness does not mean pretending it did not happen. It means choosing not to let it poison your future. I was granted asylum in a European country. I started a new life, learned a new language, found a church that welcomed me, and I began telling my story. First to small groups, then to larger audiences, and now to you. I started this story by telling you that my husband threw me into a well, 40 feet down, cold water, darkness, certain death. Now you know what happened next. I met the light of the world in the darkest place I have ever been. He did not prevent me from being thrown into that well, but he met me at the bottom, and he brought me out. Some people hear my story and ask why God allowed it to happen in the first place. Why did he not stop Dawood from throwing me into the well? Why did he let me suffer for all those years before I found the New Testament? Why does he allow his children to go through such terrible things? I do not have a perfect answer to those questions. I am not a theologian. I am just a woman who experienced something I cannot explain. But I know this. Before the well, I had faith. After the well, I had certainty. There is a difference. Before the well, I believed Jesus was real. After the well, I know he is. Before the well, I believed he could save. After the well, I know he does. Before the well, I believed he would never leave me. After the well, I know he will not. Maybe you are watching this and you are in your own kind of well right now. Maybe not a literal one, but a dark place, a hopeless place, a place where you feel abandoned and alone. Maybe the person who should have protected you is the one who hurt you. Maybe you are wondering if anyone sees you, if anyone cares, if there is any point in continuing. I am here to tell you that someone does see you. Someone does care. The same Jesus who met me in that well is available to you right now. You do not need to be in the perfect place. You do not need to have the right words. You do not need to clean yourself up first. Just call out to him. He hears, he answers, he comes. My name is Layla. I was thrown into an abandoned well by my husband and left to die in cold water and darkness. But death could not hold me, because the light found me. And if he found me at the bottom of a well in the mountains of Iran, he can find you wherever you are. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.